Welcome, everybody. And I just want to give a quick disclaimer just because of obviously current events and what's going on, and wanted to make sure that people understand that this webinar will have nothing to do with coronavirus, COVID-19, and this webinar is still meant to cover the subject matter, the PPE topic, but I will not be covering any coronavirus specific information whatsoever. So with that, we'll get into it. So again, the title is PPE, the last resort yet top of mind. And the reason behind that title is that, yes, I understand and we know as safety and risk professionals that we have a hierarchy of controls, and PPE is that last resort. But usually in our workplaces, the most visual way that we can see safety and see what's going on is that people are wearing their required PPE. So even though as safety professionals, we think of it last, often our workers and workforce are thinking of it first. And so this is a common roadblock, but also an opportunity. And so I hope that I'll be able to show you how it can be an opportunity. So my goals for today's presentation are to give you some strategies for how you can do better or supplement what you're already doing to identify the needs your workers have for PPE and the specific solutions out there. We'll also talk about the current landscape of OSHA enforcement, and it's not a big motivator, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but it's important to understand that landscape and what OSHA is saying about PPE. We'll also get into some of the latest trends about PPE that can also help your workers increase their compliance, or to assist you as a safety and risk professional with coaching them towards compliance. And then finally, I'll leave you with some resources that I like to use to stay on top of PPE innovations, and hopefully there's going to be some new things that you pick up along the way. So first, we'll start with that PPE needs analysis, which I think a lot of us, we might think that this is common sense, but there's still a lot that we could dig into on this topic. So first, let's start with the OSHA regulations as they relate to general industry. And I think in your platform here, as you're looking at the webinar, that you're able to download the slides. And so I do strongly suggest that to download the slides as a resource, and also because I've included a lot of resource links that will live beyond the information presented in the slides. So I encourage you to download it and navigate through the document. Sorry. So with general industry, there's a lot of standards that are specific to PPE, and OSHA does a nice job of digesting them all onto one landing page. And so the different subparts represented there on the screen include things related to ventilation and occupational noise. HAZWOPER, of course, has its own standard that references a lot of PPE requirements. Subpart I within general industry gets into eye and face, respiratory protection, head and foot protection, PPE specific to electrical hazards, also hand protection and fall protection equipment. And Subpart J gets into permit required confined spaces, which also references specific PPE. And of course, welding and Subpart Q, and Subpart Z references our different toxic and hazardous substances, which then incorporated by reference would be your safety data sheets for the different chemicals and substances your workers are working with on a day-to-day basis. So we've got those OSHA regulations, but again, make sure you go through and look at those different subparts for what applies to your workforce, and look into what OSHA is incorporating by reference, whether it is different manufacturer guidelines, ANSI, or other consensus standards, and also the safety data sheets, as I already mentioned. In construction, you might think that there's a lot of standards related to PPE, but it's a little bit less than what general industry has. But also, you might also consider that construction is also going to refer to some of the general industry standards. So really, if you're in construction, the previous slide and this slide together will make up what you need to keep on your radar for worker PPE. And so OSHA has their own landing page for construction standards, and the subparts there, there's a general PPE language in Subpart C. Subpart E goes into the specific PPE, and it's the same list as general industry, except they're adding in some of the specific things related to fall protection, including lanyards and nets, which nets always surprises me because it feels like that's not a personal protective equipment piece, but I guess we could debate that some other time. And then it also gets into working over water, where we're talking about PPE for personally worn flotation devices. Subpart M is the construction industry fall protection standard, and Subpart P gets into PPE required for excavations, which includes protection from overhead hazards. So again, download the slides so you can refer to those specific links. And those are good links to bookmark or to refer back to on a later date also, because again, the material presented here today, it could change. So it's always important to bookmark the source links because those are updated as the material is updated. In addition to OSHA standards, we also need to take into account all of the different documents that OSHA puts together. So the Federal Register is a great resource for upcoming and proposed regulations to be familiar with what's proposed and what's out there. And believe it or not, there could be some proposed Federal Register items related to PPE, including add language about PPE fit as it relates to the construction OSHA standards. In the general industry standards, they do discuss fit. However, in the construction standards, they do not. And that's something that is always quite interesting to me because fit is a huge component of proper PPE use and selection. There's also directives that come directly from OSHA about how they give further guidance on the OSHA standards. And so maybe some people aren't aware of this tip or trick when you're looking at the OSHA standards at OSHA.gov. When you're looking at the listing of OSHA standards, and it'll have something like 1910.179. I don't know why I just said that one. Bonus points if you hit me with the chat on what that standard is. So let's say it's 1910.179A that you're looking at. And when you're looking at that on OSHA.gov, if it looks like a hyperlink, when you click on that hyperlink, it takes you to any of these Federal Register directives or letters of interpretation that relate to that standard. And so it's important that you keep looking at the OSHA website, OSHA.gov, because that's where you're going to find all the extra information that relates to OSHA standards. And again, believe it or not, that information is updated quite frequently so that we can make better decisions as they relate to the standards. So letters of interpretation, I find, are not only entertaining, but also very informative. So they're entertaining to me because some are quite old, and I always have to laugh a little bit at letters of interpretation, as I call them Dear OSHA letters, because people dating back to the late 70s and in the 80s, they wrote these letters to get more clarification on the standards. And in many cases, these letters of interpretation from the 70s and 80s are still applicable to what we're doing today. So not only is it a fun history lesson, but it's also stuff that applies to this day. So I encourage you to check that out. One of the guidance documents is about employer payment for PPE, and it seems that most people are pretty well dialed in with this topic, but it does come up once in a while. So if you need that reference, definitely look at, I'm just going to click back to the slide here. So when you go to this landing page, for example, for PPE regulations related to construction, on that landing page, they also link you to these different Federal Register directives and letters of interpretation documents. So you don't have to go through each subpart as it relates to PPE. You could go straight to this landing page that OSHA has set up for you. They also give some directives with guidance for PPE use if you're in any yards. Also, general industry and construction, of course, have some more directives related to PPE, and also inspection of PPE and how this should be done by your workers and what the employer responsibilities are. There's also really great letters of interpretation about laundering FR-rated clothing, and also electrical system PPE that gets into carrying lumber with nails, also wearing shorts on construction sites, or short pants as the interpretation calls it, and also the wearing of just orange vests instead of high visibility vests. And so it's likely that if your personnel or even just yourself have a question about PPE and some weird niche question, you can likely find it on OSHA's website. There's also, in addition to the OSHA standards, like I mentioned, there's performance standards that are, so there's performance standards, there's consensus standards, and other related standards that OSHA incorporates by reference to their standards. And so if you are doing a lot of work that relates or that requires the use of gloves, there's a European standard. There's also an ASTM standard that relates to gloves and the selection of gloves and how they're tested as well. There's also safety footwear standards where if workers, often this is a great kind of show and tell or hands-on activity for training, which is to look at the different types of PPE and apparel in the case of protective footwear and FR clothing that the workers are required to wear, and to have them look at the tags and to find out what standards all apply to what they're wearing every single day. It's a great exercise for them to understand OSHA standards versus performance standards versus consensus standards as well. NFPA has standards related to electrical safety PPE and also FR clothing. So again, the garments, the equipment that the workers are wearing, it's going to have these standards printed right on them. And so it's important to understand which standards are updated and what the workers' equipment must be labeled with. Oops, there's a placeholder. I did cover ANSI and ISEA. Sorry about that. Where I was going with this slide was the ANSI ISEA, I think it's 201 107 for high visibility clothing. And I encourage you, since I didn't complete this slide, to look at ISEA's website. And I think it is just safetyequipment.org, or if you do a quick Google search of ISEA, which stands for International Safety Equipment Association, and you will come right up to their website, and they have a great listing of all the standards that they have worked on in the past and also news and information on standards they're working on for the future. So look to them for future standards related to wearable technology as it relates to PPE. And also they just, I guess, celebrated in a nerdy safety way the 20th anniversary of the high visibility standard. So you can find resources on that as well. Other resources, I had mentioned safety data sheets right there in the middle. So if workers are exposed to chemicals and substances that require the use of specific PPE, it's best to not only look at the OSHA standards, but also refer to the safety data sheets. The safety data sheets give the most specific manufacturer recommended or required safety gear that the workers should be wearing. And so I think of this from past experience where I had workers working with different mixes of concrete, and one company that sent us a specific mix had a safety data sheet that required the wearing of nitrile rubber gloves, while another mix company sent out a safety data sheet that required the use of butyl rubber gloves. And so that came into question because we had an OSHA inspection where the whole reason for a specific kind of a targeted sweep of companies that were placing concrete, the target was because of that nitrile versus butyl rubber gloves. And their target was this wearing of butyl rubber gloves because nitrile is pretty widespread as far as the use for workers in construction. And so the company I worked for at the time actually did receive a citation that we were able to have thrown out because our safety data sheet said that the concrete mix we were working with on the date of the inspection required the use of nitrile rubber gloves, which the workers were wearing. So it's important even for OSHA compliance officers to understand that they need to take into account the safety data sheets that the workers, or for the substances workers are working with at the time of an inspection. Another resource for PPE information are the different manufacturers of that PPE and also the distributors. And so I was trying to look at different people that are on this call because it's a mixed group, and so it include companies that that manufacture or distribute PPE. And so when I say I'm pleasantly surprised by how much information is out there from the different manufacturers and distributors, I mean that because they are taking they're taking a proactive approach to educating their customer and taking a more collaborative selling approach in ensuring that their end users and customers aren't just like, they're not just trying to make the sale. Like, they actually want to provide a consultative sales experience for you. And one of the ways that you can understand or look for a company that or a distributor that is using that consultative sales approach, or like a more educated approach to selling PPE, is that they may have what's called a QSSP certification. And so the QSSP is, I forget what the acronym stands for, but I'm sure those of you on the webinar, you've probably seen this acronym. So it is something that is given through testing, and the entity that is responsible for the certification is ISEA. So when you're on that ISEA website, you can learn more about the QSSP, and I think they have what's called the QSSP Plus, I think. And so that means that sales professionals that represent different product lines of safety equipment, they're actually going and getting further education on safety and risk management and identification of PPE and products based on the actual hazards. And so when you see a representative from one of these companies that has that QSSP, that can give you a signal that that person isn't just a salesperson, that they actually have gone through some education and training and continuing education on safety and hazard analysis, and not just representing a product line and telling you the features and benefits and the cost. So look for that. I'm sure there's plenty, because there have been before, great consultative sales professionals from these distributors that don't have the QSSP. So always, your mileage may vary. So take a look into that and make sure to talk with those people to gauge their understanding of your industry and what your people need. Last but not least, you should also consult with the end users of the PPE. So us in safety, we might think we're super smart and we've done our best to analyze the workplace and understand the hazards and come up with the best equipment possible, and then we get a great price, and so we're really happy with that. And then we get the equipment out to the workers and they don't wear it, or they don't take care of it, or maybe they're taking multiple pieces of that equipment and taking it home for home use. So always keep the end user in mind, and also be actively soliciting information from those end users of the PPE. There's often small little tweaks or adjustments or a question that comes from the workers that use the equipment day to day that you can take back with you to that manufacturer or distributor that can result in a better selection of a different item, or some kind of customization or other maybe adjustment of a particular piece of PPE. And you would never know that if you're not the person that's wearing the equipment. So always make sure to do those follow-ups a la the plan, do, check, act cycle, and keep that going as it relates to PPE use. So again, what about fit? As we go through this presentation, I'm going to try to pepper in some information that doesn't come from the safety industry necessarily, so that we can make better choices about the PPE that we're putting on our workers. And so again, the question of fit comes up because it's not necessarily in an explicit OSHA standard or in a letter of interpretation. It's not even on the Federal Register at this point yet, as far as I know. So we're kind of on our own when we're trying to source PPE that is going to fit a wide range of workers. And so this is where we need to do a little bit more of outside of the box types of thinking. And I should have practiced saying this word. I know the word and sometimes I trip on it. So anthropometry or anthropometrics are the science that defines those physical measures that we should be using to better fit our workers with PPE. So it takes into account a person's size, their form, and their functional capacities. And these figures on the screen might look kind of creepy or interesting, but they are made from 3D modeling of actual people and using those 3D models to better fit the PPE on them. So NIOSH or DC NIOSH has a landing page that's dedicated to anthropometry and anthropometrics. And it's a great resource. If you haven't looked at it yet, please do take some time to click around that and look at some of the studies. And what you'll find is that a lot of the information is based on old data. And there's a reason for that. The data comes from studies of military personnel that was collected during the 1950s to the 1970s. And so our population has changed, and this is related to the United States and data collection done by the U.S. military. So based on that data, companies are still building PPE and clothing and shoes and footwear that's based on that information. And so we have a much more diverse workforce in construction, in manufacturing, in healthcare now than we ever did in the 1950s and 1970s, thinking about more women in the workplace, more diverse populations in the workplace. And so it's not just, we shouldn't just be relying on data from military personnel, which was likely men of a certain background, where their measurements may have fallen on kind of a nice, easy to plot curve. Now with our more diverse workforce, we've got people that are landing on the opposite sides of these curves. We've got people that are short and stout, and we've got people that are bigger than big and tall. We've got women that are pregnant that still need to wear PPE in the workplace, that just because a woman's pregnant doesn't mean they can't work. So there's a lot of people that are reflected in our workforce that are not reflected in this industry data from years ago. So NIOSH and CDC are working on that. They actually have these mobile labs to collect anthropometric data where they've got 3D scanners and doing computer modeling of different workers and trying to diversify the data sets that we use or that PPE manufacturers use when they are building new equipment. We also need this data because of the redesign we must do at our workplaces, because especially if you've ever been or you work in an older industrial setting, that the work tables are built a certain way, the shelving is built a certain way. And if you've got people that skew towards shorter than the average male, the average male is 5'8" the last time I checked data on that, which fortunately for me, I'm just over 5'8". So a lot of things, even though I'm a woman, a lot of things are designed pretty much for someone my height. So I don't have a lot of problems, but there's a lot of women in the workforce and men as well that are shorter than me, and they have a tougher time with some of these heights of workstations. And then there's people that are way taller than me. I live and work in Minnesota, and there's lots of tall people here. And so the workplace isn't designed for them either. And I've been on ergonomic site visits of healthcare facilities where a nurse station where they must put in or key in different things at a computer workstation is shared by multiple nurses. And we've got people that are 5'0" up to 6'5" that have to share a workstation. And so there's a lot of information that could be used to better design our workplaces. And it's in the process of being collected, but you may find yourself on the front lines of having to make modifications based on your diverse workforce. So there is opportunity. So of course, we talk about challenges, and we don't want to get too bogged down in struggles related to challenges, but try to flip it upside down and see the opportunity. So customized sizing is becoming a mass or available for mass consumers at this point, which maybe their sales are going to slow down now because of what's going on in the world, but the technology is still there. So there's some interesting companies out there that are doing using that 3D modeling or scanning technology to build customized clothing. And so I wanted to provide some, oops, I guess I didn't put in there. I want to provide some resources to you all. I guess I didn't want to provide a specific link, but there's a company called, I think it's called Red Thread or Red Threads, that it's a customized clothing company where I think it's for, might just be for women at this point, but there's a lot out there for men as far as customized shirts and pants and suits separate, things like that. Also, traditionally with men's clothing, it's based on actual measurements. So men that look for jeans or pants, or even FR pants. You're looking for your size, and you would give the person that works at the store, you'd tell them your inseam and waist size, and that's how your pants are shelved at a store. So it makes it pretty simple. For women, we would have to give a numbered size, but sometimes some clothing is in a letter size, and sometimes the clothing is considered juniors, and so the numbered size is odd instead of even, like it is for women's sizing. So there's a lot out there as far as what if all clothing came in actual measurements, or measurements corresponded to a size, so that a person could more easily select the clothing or select gear based on actual measurements that then fit into some kind of chart created by the manufacturer. So there's more out there. As far as women's clothing, there's not a lot out there. It's just a big mess of confusion with sizing and things not being standardized. So there's hope that with diverse workforce populations coming up with what their needs are and communicating that to the different manufacturers, that they may start to offer things in actual sizes related to real measurements and not vanity sizing like we sometimes see with women's clothing. And speaking of women, the OSHA HASWIC report, which is Health and Safety of Women in Construction, came out in 1999, which is, as far as a data collection, or even if you want to cite a report for academic purposes, it's going to be an old reference. And so it's still a decent report. And unfortunately, the concerns that are on this bullet point list are still valid for women in construction. And one of the concerns also is PPE, which isn't very adequately addressed in the standards, and also not in this report either, more so that there is just a problem with finding equipment that fits, or being provided equipment in different sizes so that women in construction or others in our workforce can actually try things on and find things that fit for them. So when you download the slides, you can still look at that old report, but realize that it needs an update. You should also be using end user input. Sales professionals should be providing samples, and not going too out of hand with providing a bunch of samples, but I think it's something that any good salesperson from these organizations would provide, and then allow for the workers to actually use those samples to try them out during tasks that they would actually use that equipment. So this is because a large isn't always a large. The material that a glove, for example, is made out of could change the fit. So for an example, on the screen, there's a pretty typical standard leather work glove. And you may think you know what size you are in that glove. But then you take that same size and you want to go buy another type of glove, like one of those cotton string knit nitrile dipped gloves. And because those fibers are woven a little bit tighter, and also the dip on the palm is in place as well. If you think you're a large in your leather work gloves and want to get a large in this other type of glove, it may not work for you because the knit is tighter, and so you may need a bigger size. So keep that in mind as well, that even if the sizings, even from the same manufacturer or brand, the sizing may vary from different types of equipment based on the material and the different functions that material is there for. Also check in frequently with the workers. Make sure that when you issue PPE that they understand the useful life of it. That often, and I love the gloves for examples because they seem like such a throwaway item that people don't consider too much, but these string knit dipped gloves, sometimes they might last a person one work shift or one day or a few days to a week. And the employer may be thinking, I just bought them gloves. These gloves are pretty sturdy. They should last them a year. And so make sure to manage those expectations on the employer side and also for the worker, so they understand and are empowered that if the equipment is in rough shape and worn out, it's meant to protect them. And so if it's not in good condition, it's not going to protect them. An employer can also take the lead on this ownership or empowerment by buying quality PPE. So you have these diminishing returns, right? If you buy something cheap, it's not going to last that long. So then you buy more of thing, and now you've spent a bunch of money when you could have maybe bought or purchased slightly higher quality, higher cost items, and calculating the cost per wear or calculating how long the worker is able to wear it compared to replacing that item multiple times in the same amount of time. Often you'll find that investing in the more expensive, higher quality item is going to actually save you money in the long run. So I know that's sometimes a tough one. I used to pride myself on how cheap I could get some safety equipment while still meeting the standards. I remember safety glasses that often in construction, safety glasses get pretty beat up. But if you buy a higher quality item, it's not going to get as beat up. And what I found also was that when I purchased items that kind of looked cool, or even if they didn't look that cool, some items just won't look cool. But if the workers could really feel that the item was of high quality, that they would take better care of it. So I found if I bought safety glasses that I could get for 75 cents to $1.50 a piece, they treated it like a disposable item. If I bought nicer, slightly nicer quality safety glasses that were $4.25 a piece, they would treat them much better and take care of them. They'd wash the lenses. They would protect the glasses when they weren't in use. And yes, sometimes on the weekend at the grocery store, I would see workers wearing those safety glasses because they thought they were cool. They thought the glasses were cool. And to me, I was okay with that because I figured, well, if they're wearing them to the store, they might be wearing them when they're doing some light work around the house or work in the yard. And I was okay with that. So I know there was a question preloaded in the Q&A about something about workers wearing their PPE. I forget the exact question, but that they were basically taking the PPE and wearing it off site. And again, it comes down to company culture and how you view things. Also, that maybe it's not that big of a deal if it's preventing injury. And then, of course, us safety and risk professionals, we can be an influencer by showing off kind of the latest and greatest stuff for the workers. And we go to trade shows, or maybe we'll resume going to those in a few months. And when you're at industry events or just getting samples, you can bring the latest and greatest to the workers and find out, is this latest and greatest, or is this just a new product line just for the sake of new product line? So have the workers be that ruthless evaluator of the PPE because they're the ones wearing it. I may not get a chance to get into too much detail on this conformity assessment, but it's a tool that you could use at your workplace if you're looking for a thought process on evaluating PPE. So this is a tool that was developed by NIOSH, and so it's looking at products, or it could be, you could use this for a system or a process at your organization, and you can use that link to guide you through. It's a relatively new document from 2018 from NIOSH, and it takes into account this conformity assessment where you're looking and evaluating items that you're using in your workplace. And so the framework related to PPE that they line out here is for the reason of that PPE often isn't just related to a specific standard, that you may have an internal workplace standard that you're following, that you're going way above and beyond OSHA requirements, or maybe just slightly above OSHA requirements. And so OSHA's guidance is kind of exhausted for you at that point. So it's giving you another thought process or framework, as they're calling it, to evaluate that equipment. So they talk about input activities and direct activities, and you can kind of layer over that plan, do, check, act cycle in here as well. So if you're looking for more information on building a PPE assessment, this is going to be a great go-to tool for you. So I want to get into some of the OSHA enforcement, and I know you've all seen the OSHA top 10 for 2019 as it relates to serious violations. And so it's not just that PPE is the 10th in the top 10, but that's just for eye and face. And so looking at number 9 with fall protection and training requirements, that relates to PPE as well. Machine guarding could loosely relate to PPE. Of course, number 6 there, respiratory protection. Respirators are a piece of personal protective equipment, so that falls right into it as well. Hazard communication, number 3 up there, there are PPE there's PPE content that you need to provide your workers when you're conducting hazard communication program design and also hazard communication training. Scaffolding can also relate to PPE because there may be specific fall protection equipment that needs to be worn by workers that are erecting or dismantling scaffolding. And of course, number one, fall protection, depending on the hierarchy of controls and what's used, PPE could be a part of fall protection as well. So that's just for, this is for general industry, or excuse me, this is overall. So PPE is a part of a lot of these top 10 serious violations year after year. And so it is, even though it is that last resort in our hierarchy of controls, it seems to be something that still is giving us a little bit of challenge. Then we get into willful violations. So as they relate to PPE, of course, they almost fall right in line with the serious violations. So they've got fall protection on there a few times as it relates to that first one, General 1926.501, and then also the training requirements at number 10 there for 1926.503. And some of the other ones as well as respiratory protection is there again. So what's new? I think maybe that might be a topic that people are looking for out of this webinar to understand more about some of those trends and what's going on with PPE. So with fit and function, because I think these are very important, because if there's better function or multifunction in the case of some PPE lately, that the workers are more apt to wear their gear. Again, going back to that point of investing in more high quality PPE, I think that, again, that's going to drive better compliance with the actual wearing of the PPE. For example, hearing protection. There's a lot of hearing protection out there workers must wear all day, but often it makes communication difficult. And so the technology has come a really long way as far as dual function hearing protection that also functions as a communication piece. So radio communication, or being able to listen in on a workplace channel for hazard and safety information. Also PPE that's out there to withstand high radiant heat temperatures. So if you're working in a workplace like a foundry or other high heat area, sometimes PPE, especially the protective clothing that you have to wear, it doesn't last very long, or it doesn't stand up well to the high temperatures. And often that radiant heat is then transferred to your body and we have a heat stress situation. So there's PPE that can kind of insulate you from that radiant heat that's created by the work that you're doing, and also that the gear itself stands up better to the high heat environment. There's also eyewear that is, I feel that eyewear has come a long way. Side protection, as far as having side shields, is giving way to foamed eye protection, where you have that foam gasket layer that sits on the worker's face, sits on the skin to keep from having that spacing in between the glasses frame and the face without having bulky side shields. And so in the past, there's been removable gasket types of eyewear, and also where you can remove the side temples, I think they're called, or the bows of the glasses, and attach on an elastic type of headband so that they function as goggles. And so often I think what people were finding is that the workers weren't making those adjustments, that they'd wear this multifunction foamed eyewear as is and wouldn't change out the band. And so why have that extra band and charge extra for that equipment? Just make it a multifunction piece of eyewear that just always has that foamed layer in place to act as that side protection. I love that kind of eyewear personally, because in the past when I wore contact lenses, and even now I feel very sensitive to any dust being kicked up when I'm outside, and it's nice to have that foam layer to keep that out. The flip side on that is cleaning, but again, if the workers have more high quality gear, again, they're more apt to take care of that equipment, which includes cleaning. There's also lighter weight fall protection harnesses out there that I bring this up because I've seen fall protection that is geared towards women, and often the only quality or function, or not function, the only differentiator in that equipment is that it's a different color. And so when manufacturers are offering something for diverse workers for the workforce, don't just mess around with the color, although yes, it is nice sometimes to have some different colors, but that should not be the only factor that a manufacturer is then calling something a piece of equipment for women. There's a company, I mean, we're all familiar with them, but I don't want to drop names in this presentation, but there's a great fall protection harness out there that distributes the weight of the harness off of the shoulders and off of the lower back. I don't know how they do it, but I've tried it on, and it is a fantastic fall protection harness that one could wear all day. And it could be geared towards women to have that lighter weight, but I think that definitely it's something that anybody that wears fall protection harnesses all day could benefit from. There's also a changing technology with respiratory protection and the end of service, oh my gosh, ESLI, the end of service life indicator. That the color code or other change that occurs, that it's easier to view it as the end user so that you can change out the cartridge on time. And so that type of technology that gives the visual cue that this piece of equipment needs to be replaced, I think that's something that that's great for workers. They can make those decisions, and then they bring that equipment to you to be exchanged and replaced. Some more on fit and function, there's more loose fitting respirators available out there, or as I call them, facial hair friendly respirators, because somehow the trends in just how men shave or don't shave for work has skewed more towards interesting facial hair and sometimes big beards. So people often get a kick out of the NIOSH visual that explains different styles of facial hair and then layers a respirator mask outline to show that, well, if you have a mustache, but it's kept tidy, that a respirator that's tight fitting could still fit over it. But if you have that ZZ Top beard, it's just not going to work. So sometimes you can use humor and popular images like that to convey a message to the workers. And if you've got a labor force that I remember working in construction with pipe fitters, that pipe fitters always had these crazy beards. And so when they needed to wear respiratory protection, that we went to full face respirators or loose fitting types of respirators as it applied to the hazard, because people just did not want to shave. And so I know some workplaces are more strict about that than others, but it's worth checking out. Again, if you're not having to dictate how workers do their personal hygiene, that can help you in having them actually comply with wearing the equipment that they're supposed to. There's also protective clothing, as I mentioned, with the high heat resistant types of clothing. There's also protective clothing that is now available in lighter fabrics and maybe looser weaves that still offer protection, but also offer the ability for heat transfer to occur, heat away from the body. So as we head into spring and summertime, but people still need to wear specific protective clothing, it's nice to have options out there that aren't just like wearing a garbage bag as far as the air transfer. I've had to wear Tyvek suits in the past over clothing as protective clothing, and that gets hot really fast. So it's nice to have options. There's also more out there as far as eyewear and transition lenses and polarized lenses. So the transition lenses are nice because I don't mean like bifocal or vision correction, but I mean transitioning from like that indoor, outdoor, or darker shade to a lighter or clear shade for indoors. So manufacturers and employees are finding that the traditional indoor, outdoor shaded lens is actually, it's okay for outdoors. It provides some sun protection, but they're not great for indoors because they're just a little bit too shaded. And so I've noticed that in the past myself. I thought, well, I can just wear one type of safety glasses and be good in any environment, but it just didn't work that way. So look for better technology with the transition of the different shades in the lenses. And then just overall, it seems there's some more availability of custom fit options and also being able to get sizes outside of the traditional small, medium, large, extra large, but getting it at the same pricing. So I've always had to laugh when there's a extra small or extra, extra small, and it costs more than an extra large, even though it's less material. So manufacturers are starting to realize, and distributors are realizing, that pricing still needs to be uniform, even if someone doesn't fit in the traditional one size fits most, or within that traditional small, medium, large, extra large. Innovation is happening pretty fast. I think a lot of manufacturers are kind of toying with the wearable technology and having sensors built into the equipment, but don't really have platforms quite set up for that sort of technology yet. So some other cool innovation that's happening is to make the PPE easier to inspect. And so that end of service life indicator, if you could quickly scan the workers in your workplace that are wearing respirators and see if someone has an indicator that says that a cartridge needs to be replaced, that makes your job a heck of a lot easier. It also makes the work daily inspection a lot easier as well. There's also innovation with convenient selection and also using the equipment. So I've noticed this with respirators, that the straps and being able to easily lower and put the respirator back into place without adjusting too many aspects of the fit is really nice, because often workers would be taking a respirator, a multi-strap respirator off, and it required then like a full resizing to put it back on, and often they wouldn't do that, and so then they're not as protected as they could be because the equipment wasn't sized back appropriately for them. There's also, I've seen manufacturers that they're not increasing the price as they're incorporating the best technologies and features and styles that are selling well with their current models. And then so they'll take the older, outdated, and unisex sizing off the market. So it's just a smart way that these manufacturers they're listening to their customers, and then also by doing that and taking the outdated, the not best sellers off their catalogs, that it's streamlining their manufacturing and distribution as well. So whenever possible, make sure that if you're getting a lot of feedback from workers about PPE and you've got a pretty good relationship with the manufacturer or distributor, give them feedback. That is so valuable, because especially with the fit aspect as it relates to women, a lot of the feedback I've heard from PPE manufacturers is that they're not hearing that there's a problem. And so with PPE, what happens is workers, they're doing the best they can with what they have. And so make sure that you have that open line of communication for your workers, that they're able to report to you and say, hey, this really isn't working for me. Could we try something else? And reporting that back to the different companies that provide the equipment for you. Because then they can't say, oh, we didn't hear that it's a problem. So report all that. Incorporating hands-free technology. So of course, we know cell phones kind of run our workplace, or tablets kind of run what we're doing at work. And so we need to have them with us. But we don't want that to create a greater hazard. So there's hands-free. We can do hands-free technology by having a secure place to put a cell phone or a tablet, and then having it attached to a Bluetooth headset or something like that. So just different ways that the PPE manufacturers are listening to their customers or foreseeing potential opportunities in modifying the PPE slightly. So resources, I wanted to share resources with you throughout the presentation. So again, make sure that you download it and take a look at all those links. Also, again, just as I've instructed that you should report what the workers are saying to the distributors and suppliers and manufacturers, also just ask questions. It's perfectly okay to ask about a new product line, or why did you change this particular product? I know people become very used to their PPE, and when a manufacturer changes it, it can kind of shake up their world. And so ask the supplier, is that product really gone, or do you just not stock it anymore? Because sometimes I know people get used to what they have and they want that item. And so if it's still available and still safe to use, why not have it available? It's also cool to dream a little bit, and this is fun when you have workers together in a training setting or in a safety committee setting, to ask them, like, hey, what are your problems with the PPE and equipment that you have? And maybe asking open-ended questions like, if you had unlimited budget, or if you had $5,000, whatever you want to do, to spend on PPE, how would you spend it? Questions like that can really lead to some interesting insight from the workers instead of just saying, hey, what do you think of this? Because sometimes people, they don't respond well when they're put on the spot like that. So to be able to ask a specific open-ended question can really get a lot of interesting feedback for you. Test things out on yourself. So I like to do that because I like to learn about the different equipment out there, and I feel that if I wouldn't recommend it or if I'm having problems with a piece of equipment, why would I not expect the workers to have the same problem? So a lot of times you can head off some initial issues with a product by trying it out yourself for a while, and then once it passes your test, you can get some samples for the workers to try it out with the tasks that they're actually doing. And the last strategy I've got for you, which was difficult for me at times because I had my favorite suppliers and brands, is to expand your horizons. I mean, this is just good for price checking, but also to get out of your comfort zone or your usual stuff, because you might be missing out on something that will actually protect your workers better or be of higher quality or have some features that your workers have been missing from the equipment that they currently use. And so at this time, I want to open it up to questions and just put well, I'll save that. I'll put my contact information up because I realize I left with 2 minutes for the end for questions. So if you have a specific question, it's nice to get in touch this way, but I'll take some questions at this time.
Absolutely. So we do have a ton of questions that have been coming in. So thank you everyone for your participation. And Abby, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon as well. The first question here, does loose-fitted respirators pass the fit test? Or do loose-fitting respirators pass the fit test?
Okay, I think I get the question. Depending on the respirator, there may be elements that you need to fit test, but overall, if something's loose fitting, it's meant that it's not having a tight fitting seal, which would not require a fit test. But again, you know, brands and manufacturers vary, so always check with the specific brand and the product information to make sure you understand any fit testing requirements, whether it's loose fitting or tight fitting.
Great, thank you very much. Next question, is there a good form out there to annually certify your site PPE matrix?
This is an interesting question. When you throw out the word certify, I don't think there's a specific entity that's looking for certification of your PPE matrix. That would be something that's internal to your company. So I would suggest, since there's likely not strict OSHA guidance on this, is to check out that NIOSH conformity assessment tool that's in the presentation, and that could maybe help you out.
Great, thank you, Abby. Next question here. I'm going to try to fit in a couple more before we finish up. How do you encourage the use of safety eyewear, glasses, and gloves? And do you ever encounter any employees that permit workers to take home 1 or 2 pairs for personal use?
I haven't seen an employer that actually has a policy that says you can take this stuff home. I've just seen that workers, they just take it with them. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier in the presentation, that in the past, I didn't really care as long as they weren't, they were taking home the glasses and the gloves that they were using on their person that day. I would have a problem if a worker starts taking a box of gloves home or a box of safety glasses home. That's not what it would be intended for. But again, it's up to an employer based on their culture and how they choose to run their operations. If they want to encourage or allow workers to take things home. In the past, like I said, if it's being off in their safety glasses, they're still wearing them when they get in their vehicle after work. And, you know, that's an honest thing that happens. And then they have to mow the lawn or do some weed whacking. And so they wear their safety glasses. To me, that's acceptable. That's fine. I don't think I would have an actual written policy about it. It's more so the policy is about the workplace and making sure that they have the equipment they need for work. So the way that it would probably creep into the workplace is if they brought home PPE and then they don't have it now when they come back to work. So that would be something to address on an individual case-by-case basis and based on your workplace policies.
Great, thank you, Abby. And I know we are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to just finish out with this one question here. How should I go about fit testing? Can it be done in-house or does it need to be an outside source?
So again, that depends on how well staffed your company is for conducting the fit testing. There's nowhere that says fit testing has to be done by a third party. So if you have safety staff at your company and they've gone through training to understand how to conduct fit testing, then you can do your own fit testing in-house. Of course, there's employers that may want to have a third party take care of this because of maybe more complex respirators that are used, or if you want to use like a port account type of machine and you don't want to buy it, I can see that maybe you'd use a third party for that type of fit testing. But in general, the OSHA standard does not say that a third party has to do fit testing. This is something that you can get your own equipment, training, and have your own internal staff conduct that for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. And I just want to say thank you again for spending the afternoon with us. Great presentation.